The Watcher, Chapter 4, Tea. Fluttershy carefully approached him with the first aid kit, shuddering with each step. The princess said you were wounded, so I thought, if you wouldn't mind that is, maybe I could have a look at it? He looked at her without moving. He had actually almost forgotten about the wound. He held up his hand for her to see, the long and red cut clearly showing between the fabric.
Your concern is appreciated, but not necessary, he said. The damage is only superficial. It does not serve to lessen functionality, and...
The others gasped as the shadow started to dance over the wound.
It is easily mended.
He let the void pour over the wound, enclosing it and realigning the broken flow of at the surface before reversing it. Before the pony's eyes, the wound simply started to close itself, the shadows slowly starting to immerse themselves in his flesh, as the crusted blood turned liquid again and returned into his body. When the cut had closed, he shifted the void towards the cut cloth and repeated the process, the black fabric returning to its former form. When he was done, he flexed his hand and slowly moved his fingers, assuring that all damage had been repaired, and returning the flow to its natural direction. Twilight gasped. I've never seen a healing spell like that before. How did you do that?
The concept of magic has nothing to do with this. It is a simple mechanism of redirection.
She scrunched her face as she tried to understand what he just said. He dropped his hand again.
Do not try to understand it. You naturally lack the necessary distinction to comprehend the mechanism.
Why do I get the feeling you just insulted me?
It is not an insult. It is a simple observation. Your mind and form are confined to this phase of existence. To understand, you would have to move your cognition outside your given boundaries.
Now I really get the feeling you're telling me I'm dumb, she replied with a sour voice.
Then let me explain it to you in a form you can comprehend. To do what I do, you would need to be able to see all of the 13 dimensions and beyond.
13? That's absurd! The philosophical studies of Greyhoof have clearly stated there are only 5 dimensions. 3 of space, which you move in, 1 for time, which backs upon us, and another for magic, from which she rehearsed like from a book.
Greyhoof studies are not unknown to me. But just like yours, his cognition was confined by the natural boundaries of his mind and body. Also, he was a philosopher, so he was already unsuited for a proper observation from the beginning. He also had an unhealthy obsession for hoof manicures.
Twilight looked taken aback. What? Are you saying that... excuse me? A timid voice interrupted them. He slowly turned his head towards Fluttershy again. She was still standing next to him. I have a little mouse at home that has a bad cut on one of his paws.
And?
Could you maybe help it? I'm afraid he's not doing so well. He looked at her for a moment.
I could.
Her eyes seemed to shine with hope.
But I won't.
His voice was unmoving as ever. Her eyes started to fill with tears. What the fuck is your problem? You made Fluttershy cry! Rainbow Dash shouted at him angrily. How can you be so heartless? She looked ready to jump at him, but when he turned his head towards her, she seemed to have become less sure of herself. She's just asking you for help. What's wrong with helping a friend?
First, I am not anyone's friend, not even any pony's for that specific matter. I am merely an observer to your world. Second, as such, it is not meant for me to intervene in any way of what occurs in this world. It would only serve to disrupt the natural flow of things.
That was something he would not risk, at any cost. There was too much at stake. He turned to Fluttershy again. Something in her sad face actually moved him. It almost made him feel guilty for his words.
You have my condolences nonetheless. I am sure you will manage to help it.
She sniffed a tear away. Thank you. Then why did you save me? Celestia asked. If you were so determined not to intervene, why did you stop the assassination? The girls looked at him with expecting eyes. He remained silent for a moment. the gears grinding in his head as he tried to answer the very question to himself.
I do not know.
You don't know? What kind of an answer is that? You decided to do it, so you must have some kind of reason. Applejack spoke up with an unbelieving face. In all her life, she had never met any pony or anything that spoke with such an emotionless voice.
I do not know. That is all. If it was either by instinct or by lack of proper judgment that I let myself act.
Celestia raised an eyebrow.
I cannot tell. It still serves to puzzle me.
Rarity huffed. How could any pony be so cold is what puzzles me. Don't you even care what happens to those around you?
It is not my place to act upon sympathy or misplaced care. I take no joy in death or sadness, but I have come to terms with it. As much as it may pain you to hear this, I simply cannot allow myself to care.
Pinkie Pie gave him a smirk. I think you do care.
Your line of thought is clearly wrong.
Nope. I just think you're too worried about something else and it makes you feel so sad and feel all numb and alone. So you just pretend to be yourself and pretend to yourself that you don't care. He looked at her for a moment. Where had this come from? Had she knowledge he was unaware of? Could the distorted flow around her be responsible for this? The results of such a phenomena always varied, so the possibility couldn't be excluded. Much to his displeasure, she interpreted his silence as an agreement. See, you do care.
I do not,
he replied with much of an even voice as he could muster. Do too.
I do not,
he repeated with growing anger. I think she's right, Fluttershy commented on his side. He turned towards her. She visibly trembled at his gaze, but continued. I can feel there is a terrible burden on your heart, and I can feel your sorrow. You really are lonely, aren't you?
I am not.
Would you like a hug? You'd feel better in an instant. She offered him a smile. He looked at her with much disbelief for a moment.
I would advise you refrain from touching me. I am poisonous to the touch. It would be your death.
She gasped and quickly took a step back. You're lying. Applejack started from her place at the table. I'm sure of it. He turned to her. The element of honesty at her best. He changed the carrier envelope offset of the void around himself and readjusted the frequency bandwidth, turning the void in the surface into pure death.
Try me now,
he said with a grave voice.
I am poisonous to the touch. It would be your death.
Applejack's jaw nearly dropped onto the floor. He's not lying now. Celestia eyed him with surprise. You changed yourself to be toxic?
I merely altered a small detail. I do not wish to be touched.
Fair enough. You have made your point clear. But please, be so kind as to reverse your alteration so we may continue without concern for our health.
Very well.
He paused for a moment, returning the wave to its prior form.
It is done.
Thank you very much, Celestia said with a small nod. Now, what kind of tea would you like? The question surprised him.
What?
The flavour of tea, she asked carefully. Sadly, we have no knowledge of your diet or taste, so we simply prepared a broader selection and hope to satisfy your wishes. Please, feel free to pick whatever you want. He looked over the table with a slow motion of his head. A seemingly never-ending variety of tea, cake, small muffins, and assorted biscuits and desserts spread out before him. He knew every pastry by name, but he had never tried any of it. There had simply never been a need to. He continued to stare at the collection for another minute before slowly raising his hand and picking up the smallest and simplest biscuit he could find. He mustered it in his fingers for a moment before breaking it into two and placing one half on the plate in front of him. The other half he carefully put back in its original position. The ponies watched his every move with fascination. Are you sure that's all you want? Celestia asked with disbelief.
It will suffice to meet the requirements of protocol,
he simply stated. She raised an eyebrow. And what tea would you like to drink?
Water.
Luna looked at him with wonder. You want a cup of what water? He tilted his head slightly, wondering if protocol required the water to have taste.
With a slice of lemon in it, perhaps.